Okay, welcome back. So we were looking at Raven and Coyote, and we're also going to look at some other tricksters. Um, and yeah, remember what Tricksters, and specifically he was drawing on the example of Raven and Coyote, is that the Tricksters are usually mediators. They're in between in some way. So he believed, that we have these sort of opposites in our society, and they cause us real extremes. They are real extremes, and they cause us real anxiety, like life and death. Young and old, male and female. We're stressed out about them, and so we look for some kind of figure that can balance them out. And who that is usually a trickster, or can often be a trickster. Uh, and that's kind of because tricksters seem to be able to act outside of society in some way. They seem to be able to act outside the normal bounds of what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. I mean, think about how Anansi does so many things that you're not supposed to do, and yet people end up loving him for it anyway. And that's true of Raven and Coyote as well, who come from a completely separate tradition, completely, other side of the world. It's pretty wild, but they are doing a similar sort of thing. And Levi Strauss says, why did we pick these particular animals? Because these animals are already sort of paradoxical. They're in between the opposites. They are neither hunters nor herbivores. They eat meat, but they eat it off already killed animals. So they work in their own way that defies the opposite. So that puts them outside of the normal way things are and the normal way that people behave. And we'll find that with a lot of different tricksters, and we'll find that with Anansi as well. Not necessarily in quite the same way, but he does seem to act outside the bounds of society. Sometimes tricksters are kind of outcast. You have the trickster stories thinking of the slave, and sometimes it literally is a slave who is the main character of an African American trickster story, or it's someone who seems, low down in the sense of they are not viewed positively by society. They are on the bottom rung. They are the underdog. So this trickster's being outside of the society, that kind of allows them to break the rules. And weirdly enough, like with Raven and Coyote, that ends up sort of letting them establish things that become important to society later on. But there's an example in the book. The last trickster story in there is about a young boy known as Little Old Witch Boy. There's a name. So Little Old Witch Boy is looked down upon by everybody, but he sees that his sister is actually marrying a boar hog, a kind of pig guy, when she thinks she's actually marrying a handsome man. And so he knows the truth, and he is able to trick the pig guy into transforming back into a pig in full sight of everybody. So he reveals the truth. Even though nobody likes him, he's able to pull the wool off of everybody's eyes. And so that sort of seems to imply that tricksters are sometimes outcasts, but they end up saving everybody or helping everybody. And this one feels a lot more like a fairy tale. So there's some connections to fairy tales here in terms of, Rumpelstiltskin feels like kind of a trickster figure as well. And I think tricksters are also related to Jung's idea of the shapeshifter. They put on a lot of different costumes. They take on a lot of different identities. They lie about who they are, or they sort of recreate who they are by playing around with all these different costumes and whatnot. So I think there's a strong connection as well to Jung's shapeshifter archetype, which isn't something we looked at super much. We'll see it a little bit more with Joseph Campbell, but that dream characters can have different identities and can change forms. Tricksters are all about that, and they don't stay with any one form for long. Okay, now I want to talk about a bunch of different tricksters. I want to talk specifically about one of my favorite tricksters, Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny seems to be, kind of almost inspired by the Brer Rabbit tradition. I don't know if this is literally true, but it's an interesting thing. He's a cartoon character, and there are a lot of cartoon characters like him, but he's one of the best at what he does. Think about what happens in every sort of Bugs Bunny cartoon. Somebody annoys Bugs Bunny. They do something to him. They harm him in some way, and then he gets his revenge on them, and he makes them look like an absolute fool in various sort of trickstery ways. And yeah, the thing about Bugs Bunny is that, unlike Anansi, he never acts just because he's lazy or he's greedy. He always gives you a reason to root for him. And that's usually because a Bugs Bunny cartoon will start off with somebody, maybe it's Elmer Fudd or Daffy Duck, or in this case, both. Um, they do him harm in some way. So, for instance, in one of the famous Bugs Bunny cartoons, it starts off with Daffy Duck leading Elmer Fudd to Bugs's rabbit hole, and Elmer Fudd shooting into the rabbit hole and scaring the pants off of Bugs Bunny. And what does Bugs Bunny say when somebody has harmed him in this way? He says, "Of course, this means war." And then, of course, he goes out of his way to, pull the other guy's pants down or play some trick on him, just make him look like a fool in lots of different interesting ways. And there's a lot of characters he does that to other than Elmer Fudd, and they've always done him wrong in some way. So that's Bugs Bunny's kind of little code there. So if somebody harms him, he's going to get back at them, which is a fun way to do the story. And makes us root for him a lot. And he is very much a shapeshifter. He will put on different disguises. He dresses up as a beautiful lady to trick Elmer Fudd, all sorts of things like that. And the classic is when he is the episode where he's going up against Elmer Fudd and Daffy Duck simultaneously, and so he manages to get Daffy, who's claiming that Elmer should shoot Bugs because it's rabbit season. He manages to trick Daffy into saying it's duck season, and then Elmer Fudd gets Daffy instead. So that's a 1-2 combo right there. But Bugs is very good at tricking people. And it's, of course, because they're greedy or they're foolish, and he takes advantage of their foolishness. Now to move on to another favorite part of the world, which is, of course, Greece. So there's tricksters in Greek mythology. We haven't gone into them a whole lot, but I think I might have mentioned early on in the class that Prometheus is a trickster. And at first glance, you might not see why. He doesn't really act like Bugs Bunny, for instance. He's not quite that over the top or flamboyant. But I think if we look a little closer, we see him acting as a trickster and doing trickster sorts of things. In the very so we know, of course, that Prometheus is famous for stealing fire from the gods and being punished by having his liver ripped out by an eagle or a vulture. But what I didn't tell you is that the backstory for all that is that he plays a trick on Zeus, which gets him in trouble. So he plays this trick on Zeus. The trick is that Zeus is deciding, with Prometheus's help, how human beings are going to do sacrifices. So the sacrifice, you kill the animal and then the smell goes to the god and then human beings get to eat the meat. But it wasn't always that way. Prometheus made a role in bringing that about. He gave Zeus two choices. He showed him an ugly stomach and a bunch of tasty-looking fat and juicy parts. And he asked Zeus to pick between the two different choices. Which one should the gods have and which one should the humans have? He let Zeus choose that. But it was all a trick because Prometheus created human beings and he loves human beings and he's always trying to help them out. So the trick was that the ugly stomach actually contained all the good meat. It was in disguise. It didn't look good, but it was good. And meanwhile, the tasty-looking fat was actually just over a bunch of bones. So that was only the bunch of bones. So Zeus picks the bones, and then, the gods got tricked. The humans got all the good parts. The gods got all the bad parts. And to this day, human beings get the meat, and gods get the bones and the fat, as well as the smell. The gods dine on sort of the odor of the cooking meat. And there's a big question of if this actually successfully tricked Zeus. Because remember, because in some versions of the story, it's like, Zeus knew what was going on all the time, and he wanted to punish Prometheus for even trying to trick him, so he played along. But that sounds like a bit of a retcon to me. I think that Zeus was, maybe in an earlier version of the story, it was all about how Zeus was tricked. And then later Greeks try to rationalize it, because having your whole system of sacrifice be based on a trick, maybe that doesn't sound quite as good as you want it to. But yeah, he tricks Zeus, and so that's the cause of tension between him and Zeus. And so Zeus says, "Yeah, well, human beings aren't going to get fire. How do you like that?" And so it's this war of tricks back and forth. And if you think about it, what happens after that? Um, Zeus also plays a trick on Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus. He sends him this beautiful woman who is, looks good on the outside, but she's not so good on the inside. It's very appropriate. It goes right along with what Prometheus did to Zeus. So there's the trickster getting tricked, but he seems more like what we'd call a hero. He does something important and good for humanity. So we celebrate him and more see him as this tragic figure. And most tricksters' punishments aren't quite so severe, but tricksters often do get punished for the tricks that they play by being tricked themselves. And so Prometheus ends up, having this horrible punishment. But it seems like maybe once upon a time, Prometheus was more of a trickster like Raven or Anansi or something like that, and his stories were more sort of folk tale-y. But over time, as the Greeks got more sort of fancy with the way they told the story and more serious and dark, they kind of converted Prometheus into something more like what we'd call a hero. Definitely what we'd call a culture hero. So cultural hero is a term that means somebody who like founds a great tradition. We've got like the Yellow Emperor in China. We've got Prometheus, who sets up the way that human beings sacrifice to the gods. One of the most important things in Greek religion, and he sets it up. And he also gives people fire, and it's said that, he creates human beings in the first place. There's a lot of mythological characters who kind of fit that bill of creating human beings or helping human beings back at the very beginning of the time. And and sometimes these culture heroes who invent culture for people end up being tricksters as well. And I think Prometheus is one who started off that way, and then he sort of lost some of his trickster qualities over time. But he started off doing that sort of thing. So here's an interesting question to think about: why would tricksters be the ones who would sort of found and set up society for people? That's a question worth thinking about. Another trickster in Greek mythology is Hermes. We haven't really talked a whole lot about Hermes, but Hermes is very interesting. He is the god who can go anywhere, and he never stays in one place for long. They have statues of him kind of at various road markers and at crossroads to tell you which way to go. And so in a lot of ways, he's the god of travel. He is a god who can get in and out of the underworld very easily, so he takes souls to Hades. And when he brings Persephone back, he's the one who brings her back again as well. So that's Hermes for you. He can go anywhere. But he's also associated with thieves, interestingly enough. He can slip in and out of, a house or something like that. That's the way he is. He can go anywhere. And they named his Roman name is Mercury, and they named the planet Mercury after him because it's close to the sun and it's always zipping about in a circle. So that's pretty fun. But the idea of Hermes as a thief doesn't come up in a whole lot of stories, but it comes up in some. In one of his early stories, which was told as part of his worship, by the way, he tells the story of his birth, how Zeus slept with a certain goddess lady, and then Hermes was born 9 months later. And in the story immediately goes to Hermes stealing from his brother Apollo. Because Apollo had these important sheep, the sheep of the sun. In another story, he has the cattle of the sun. But Hermes, maybe he's still a baby, or maybe he's like a small child. He decides he's going to steal these from Apollo. So he plays this very careful trick, which is that he walks the sheep backwards. So it looks like their footprints are going into the cave where Apollo kept them, but he makes them look like they're going the other way. And then he, also does things to cover his tracks and to disguise what he's doing and stuff like that. So he plays a very good trick there. And he says, I'm such a stinker. I'm a prankster. This is just what I do. But then he reconciles with Apollo by giving the sheep back and also inventing the lyre. And Apollo is the god of music, so he needed some kind of music to play. So he actually helps his brother out and invents this important thing, which is music for the Greeks. He does it by taking a tortoise shell and stretching strings over it. And so that in that way, he's a founder of culture as well. Okay. So next time, or next video, I should say, next video, we're going to talk about Dionysus.